All right, good morning, guys. Today we're going to talk a little bit about budgeting. Okay, so what is budgeting, or why is it important? With personal finance, this is probably one of the first things that you'll think of when you think of the class. How do we make our money go further for ourselves, right? And to do that, we've really got to be conscientious, and we've really got to be aware of where our money is going. So in the first module, we talked a little bit about how do we get a job. How do we calculate the amount of money that we'll have in our bank account? How do we figure out how much taxes we're going to have to pay? And once we've figured out how much money we've got coming in, we've really got to take a close look at where is our money being spent. So budgeting is super important no matter what walk of life you're going to have, whatever career you go into, any job that you have, a company you work for, they're going to have budgets too. So it's very important to be able to understand and know what's going on with the budget, how to keep a budget. So there's 5 different steps that we talk about when we talk about budgeting. The first one is to set goals, which we'll talk about a little bit. The second step is to estimate how much income you're going to have to spend. So that's kind of the first unit that we talked about, taxes and paychecks and that sort of stuff. After we've after we've estimated our income, we've got to take a look at what expenses are we going to have. And we're going to have some planned expenses, some unplanned expenses, some bills we have to pay, things like that, some recreational items that we maybe want to do for fun. Those are the 2 steps that we're really going to focus on with budgeting, is estimating income and then our expenses. Step number 4 then is to plan for savings. So once we've figured out all the money that we're going to spend, we've got to figure out what can we actually save. And then the last step is to balance and adjust our budget. So where can we make some changes? Where can we save a little bit more money? Where can we afford to spend a little bit more perhaps? And do that sort of thing. So the 5 steps: 1, set goals; 2, estimate income; 3, estimate your expenses; 4, plan for savings; and then 5, balance and adjust your budget. Now when we talk about goals, hopefully all of you have some sort of goals that you want to accomplish, whether it's for this class, for school, in your personal lives, maybe sports, something you want to accomplish in your lifetime. When you have a goal, it really helps to write it down in some place that you'll see it every day, and you constantly remind yourself of it. So when you see that goal, you're always reminded what you want to do, how are you going to get it done, and every day you want to focus on that goal and how you're going to achieve it. So we talk about a goal setting process when we write a goal, just like you would for a sports team or your personal life. You can set goals for budgeting too. So there's some steps here if you want to pause and jot down some steps to kind of help you plan your goal. But what I really want to focus on is on the next slide, these SMART goals. What a SMART goal is, it's an acronym. It stands for SMART: measurable, attainable, relevant or realistic, and then time bound. You want to make sure that all of your goals that you create are SMART goals. It's one thing if I'll use an example for budgeting. You can say a goal of mine is to save more money. Okay, well that's a goal, but it's not very specific. It's not very measurable. You didn't give yourself a timeline, so we can make it better. So a better goal might be, I want to save $200 by the end of every month by July. Might be a SMART goal because it's specific. We can measure, did we reach our goal of $200 or not, and we gave ourselves a time limit. So when you create a SMART goal, you really want it to be these things: specific, measurable, attainable, time-bound, and relevant. If it's not a SMART goal, you can have trouble attaining it because, one, you might not be able to measure it or not. Can you measure, I want to save more money? How do you measure more? Is it more than 1 penny, more than $100? It kind of gets a little gray area. So you want to be really, really specific and make sure you're following SMART goals, especially when you're budgeting. Okay, so here's an example. A specific, timely, measurable, realistic, and attainable goal of creating an emergency fund, giving yourself 18 months to do so. Give yourself a measurable a measurable dollar amount of $10,000, and even figuring out even further what it's going to be per month, and then giving ways to reach that goal. You want to be very specific and very straightforward with your goal. Okay, so when we talk about budgeting, and we're going to talk about estimating income and expenses next, there's some key terms that you'll want to know. The first is money management, and that's how you get the most out of your money. How do you understand where's your money coming from and where is it going? Okay, that's something that a lot of people have trouble with, is understanding where's their money being spent. if you ask a random person at any time, it's pretty unlikely that they'll be able to tell you where all of their money is being spent. Oh yeah, $60 for this, $70 a month for that, $100 for this. Not many people can do that. The next is just a budget. And what a budget is a plan for how you're going to spend your money to meet your wants and needs. Okay, so we're gonna, like I said earlier, we're going to have expected and planned and unplanned things happen. Okay, here's a little chart that shows what the average household spends on different items. So food, clothing, personal care, housing, etc., etc. So you can imagine kind of what somebody would be spending if they made $4,000 a month. They'd spend about $640 on housing, based on what the average household does. Okay, so step number 2, estimating your income. And we talked about this in the last module, so we're not going to spend a whole lot of time, but we know the difference between gross pay and net pay. We know about taxes and deductions that have to get taken out. The reason we learn about those things is because if we don't take those things into account, we can't accurately estimate what our income is going to be. Say I take a new job that my salary is going to be $40,000. Well, my take-home pay or my net pay is not going to be $40,000, so I can't plan a budget based off of $40,000 a year. I've got to take into account some deductions, some taxes, some other things, so I can get an accurate read on what I'm going to have to spend every month or throughout the year. Okay, so we've done these problems before, estimating our expense, or estimating our income based off our taxes and our gross and net pay. So here's just a little review. If you need to pause it and take a look at this. We've talked about withholding. We've kind of reviewed this a little bit, so I'll skip through. So when we estimate our expenses, this is the most fun part, I think, for planning a budget. What are the things that we're going to spend money on? So right off the top of your head, you think about things like food and gas and a car payment, insurance, things like that. Those are called fixed expenses, things that we know we have to pay every month. They're not going to change. Your rent, you know it's going to be $600 every month, right? Your insurance, you know it's going to be $50 every month. We also have some variable expenses. What about the fun things that I want to do with my friends? If I want to go to a concert this month, if I'm going to take a vacation. These aren't things that I do all the time, but they are expenses that I can still plan for. So fixed expenses, the things that stay the same, the expenses that stay the same month to month, no matter what. We know they're going to be there. We know we have to plan for them. We know they're going to be the same. Variable expenses, just like in math, when we solve for the variable, that's the thing that changes, X or Y or Z. Those are expenses that are changing month to month. So maybe it's Christmas in December, we're going to have to plan for a little bit higher of a budget because we're going to have to buy gifts for people. Or maybe we're going to take a vacation in July, we're going to have to plan a little bit higher budget that month. We can still plan for that, but it's going to be a variable cost. It's going to change. We can affect the cost that it's going to be. Okay, so you guys can start thinking of expenses that you have to pay. Maybe if you're not paying a lot of expenses, think of the things that your parents have to pay for. Maybe ask them, hey, what are some of the things that you know you have to pay every month? Ask them what some of their bills are that they have to pay. Their utilities, electric, gas, water, heat, right? All those things we have to pay for. Internet. I also want to talk about this idea called PYF, pay yourself first. The plan for savings is at the end of our steps for the budgeting process, but ultimately, if you want to be really good at saving, something that you can do is this idea of pay yourself first. So before you even create your budget, what some people will do is they will put money in a savings account right away, and I'm sure some of you already do that, so you're not tempted to spend it at all. So you can pay yourself first. That's a strategy that a lot of people will use to try to help themselves save a little bit better. The next vocab word is this idea of budget variance. That's the difference between what you plan to spend and what you actually spend. So ideally, at the beginning of each month, we'd go through and we'd set a goal. We'd estimate what our income is going to be, estimate our expenses. But our expenses that we estimate aren't always exactly what we're going to pay. So the difference between that is called budget variance. For example, maybe I'll say, well, I'm going on vacation this month. I'm gonna budget $900 that I'm going to spend on this vacation. I go on the vacation, I have a great time. Well, I actually spent $1,100. There's a variance between what I planned to spend and what I did spend. And then lastly, we have these two vocab words, surplus and deficit. If we have more money than we thought we would have, we have what's called a budget surplus. So that means we did not spend as much as we thought we would. And if we spend more than we planned, then we have what's called a budget deficit. For example, if I plan to spend 50 bucks, I actually spend 75. That means I've got a $25 budget deficit. I spent more than I thought I was going to. And then our last step is balancing the budget. So did I have enough money to make it through all the things that I wanted to purchase? Where could I possibly spend or save some more money? You know, maybe I had a really high electric bill this month. Maybe next month I could try to use less electricity. Or maybe I could try to drive less so that my gas expense is a little bit lower. Did I have a surplus or a deficit? Did I go into debt? These are all the things that you want to kind of ask yourself at the end of the month or the week, whatever you're making your budget for, and see where you can kind of improve, adjust your balance a little bit. Okay, so you guys can kind of think or ask your parents again, what are some strategies that you use to budget? Maybe they don't budget at all. Maybe they have some really great strategies. Sometimes people will use mobile apps. There's an application called Mint that I use, which you can check out on your smartphones, M-I-N-T, Mint. It does a really good job of kind of tracking your expenses, showing you where you spend a lot of money and where you could kind of save on. So there's a lot of cool tips and tricks that you can kind of use to help you budget. So here's our list again. Set goals, estimate income, estimate expenses, plan for savings, and adjust your balance at the end. Okay, I also want to talk about this idea of net worth, which goes in really nicely with budgets. And we'll talk about this again later in this class. So this idea of net worth is to try to figure out what is somebody's wealth or what is somebody's value. And to do that, we've got to use this equation right here, assets minus liabilities. Okay? Assets are things that we own that have value. So your car would be an asset. Your clothes are assets. Your house is an asset. These are things that you own that have value. You could sell them for money if you needed to. Liabilities, are, on the other hand, are things that you owe money on. So a student loan, a car payment, bills that you have to pay. Those are liabilities. When we put those two together, so our assets minus our liabilities, that gives us somebody's net worth or their value or their wealth. Okay? So to give you an example, you know, sometimes people will just see the assets and they'll think somebody has a very high net worth, but that's not true. We've got to look at the whole picture. So let's say I just bought a brand new car that was $25,000. Well, that's great. Does that mean I'm worth $25,000 though? Not necessarily, because maybe I took a loan out on that car that cost me $27,000. So I actually owe more than I'm worth. So I would have a negative net worth at this point. And we'll come back to this idea of net worth later on in the class. So it's good to kind of touch on it now. So a statement of net worth. If you want to go apply for a loan at a bank, they'll ask you for your net worth. If you work for a company, every company has a net worth. What are all the assets that they have? What are all the things they own that have value? What are all the things they have to pay? Do they have employees they have to pay? Do they have other companies they have to pay? Do they have bills they have to pay? So that's why we do net worth. And it fits in really well with budgeting, because with budgeting we can kind of look at where's our money being spent and how is that affecting our net worth. Do we have a positive or negative net worth? We want to try to grow our value. We want to be worth more than what we owe. Okay, so here's an example that you can try out on your own. And here's the answer right here. So if we kind of put together all of our assets and all of our liabilities, so you can see her checking account, her savings account, her car, these are all assets because they're things that have value. And then loans would be things that she owes. So even though she's got a lot of these, nice things, she's got a nice car, a savings account, a checking account, she's actually, her net worth is only $25 because she owes a lot of money on different loans still. Okay? And then lastly, two vocab words that go along with net worth, solvent versus insolvent. If you have more assets than liabilities, we call that solvent. If you have more liabilities than assets, which is, you don't want that, we call that being insolvent. So again, anytime you go to a bank for a loan, you look at companies and corporations, they're gonna have a net worth or a net value. So it's important to know how to calculate that.